Three of us are going to talk about a paper that we've written that's just come out in System, specifically volume 39, and it's called From Students and Teachers' Perspectives, Meta-Analysis of Beliefs about EFL Teachers' Roles. Three of us wrote this. One is the lead author. I'm Graham Lowe. We're both from the University of York. And the third author is Maureen Lee, who is currently in Hebei in China and is too far away to contribute to the video. What we're going to do is we're not going to just take it point by point through the paper. What we are going to do is talk a little bit around it and give the main conclusions, and then perhaps give you a little bit to read if you want to read further on. Right, we're going to start with a short introduction, and essentially we're making the very simple point that if you have an educational course, assessing and evaluating it are quite important. Now, since teachers and learners and all sorts of people bring different perspectives into that course, it makes sense to actually look at those different perspectives. The aim is to find differences in perspectives, gaps in what people think or what people say, and the ultimate aim is to try and improve learning. Now, if that's going to happen, and we're going to look at these different perspectives, we actually really need people to be aware of the different perspectives that are involved. If they're going to be aware of each other's perspectives, what that really means is there needs to be a degree of interaction. Now, they can either interact with the beliefs and the ideas, or they can interact with each other. The study we're going to talk about didn't have the interacting with each other, but it did have the first type of interaction. You can see the importance of interaction as deriving from sociocultural theory and Vygotsky if you want. In all honesty, you can see it deriving from straight common sense. We're happy with the Vygotskian interpretation, but I think the common sense interpretation shouldn't really be forgotten. There's recently been quite a lot of acceptance that discourse data can come into evaluation, and it can provide aspects and perspectives that quantified instruments like questionnaires don't often do. Surprisingly, there has been very little research on this intergroup aspect of looking at what happens as one group interacts with or thinks about the other. Most studies seem to focus on teachers, and they say, well, if they affect students, how does that change go? And what we're going to take is the other way around, and we're going to say, okay, if the teacher is presented with students' views, what happens there? How do you go about doing this? There are standardly several ways of evaluating these things. But what we have done is to try to see whether we can use metaphor analysis to do this. Now, the general idea is that if you use a metaphor to conceptualize something or talk about it, you are essentially giving away your beliefs. And this is what we're trying to do. So we collect the metaphor, we look at the metaphor, and we say, well, how does this affect the way you think about things? You can argue that this raises consciousness, which is what most people do, with the secondary desire that some sort of behavioural change takes place at the end. Now, why use metaphor? Well, the usual answers are that metaphor tends to summarise what you think, it tends to evaluate what you think, it makes you think in a certain direction. There are two ways of doing metaphor analysis. The first is to say, please talk to me. I will now try to establish what metaphors you're using, and I will connect these into educational metaphors, and then we'll see what the problem is. The other way is to ask somebody to actually focus their mind. You perhaps tell them what a metaphor is, and you ask them to think about or give you a metaphor or a simile teaching is like something or other, like so teaching is like cooking, or teaching is like eating an apple pie. There are problems with doing this. Metaphor analysis has a very checkered history, but the difficulty is that you're making assumptions at various points, and there are about 6 points in the procedure where you need to operate validation checks. And in all honesty, there are quite a few studies that have not done this. The sort of problems turn up where you get, say, a teacher saying, "Oh, I can't get through to the children," and you say, "Terrible, terrible, you can't say that, because this illustrates you're using a certain type of metaphor about communication. If you do that, we'll say you're not a very good teacher, so you need retraining." So there are problems with the assumptions that people make on the different steps as we go along. Now, this study hasn't done that. It's used the other type, where you ask someone to create the metaphor, and then you think about what this involves.
In this study, at general level, we're trying to look at two groups of Chinese students and teachers. We're trying to find out how students and teachers use metaphor to represent their beliefs about their teachers' roles in the context of English teaching at Chinese university. Basically, we have 3 research aims. First thing is we're trying to look at how students and teachers use metaphor to indicate the teacher's role in the context of classroom. And second, we're trying to compare the metaphoric account between both student group. One is from first year, one is from the third year, and we are also trying to compare the account of the teacher's role between students and teachers. And third things, we're really interested to find out when teachers are exposed to student metaphor, and how far they're going to change their teaching behavior or change their teaching practice. Well, the data collection generally divided into 3 stages. At first stage, we organized a short workshop about metaphor. The aim is trying to first give a working definition of metaphor, and just make sure all the students or teachers understand what metaphor is before they try to use this sort of method. And second thing is we're trying to make sure all the participants understand what we want them to do with metaphor. At second stage is we use a very simple questionnaire, and part of the questionnaire contained a metaphor completion task in the format of an English teacher is, or an English teacher is like. We ask both teachers and the student to conceptualize an English teacher role or in their mind in the classroom. And at the stage 3, we invited both students and teachers into a face-to-face discussion. But unfortunately, due to the face-saving issues, not all the students are quite happy to join in a face-to-face discussion with their teachers. So we have to limit the interactions. We only gave the teachers the student metaphors, and trying to find out how they actually reacted to the student metaphors. And all the student and teachers metaphors are grouped into 8 conceptual categories, and there was no marked difference in the conceptualization of teachers' role between the 2 groups of students and 1 teacher group, such as teacher as a nurturer, teacher as a devotee, and teacher as a provider. And we identified marked discrepancies in 5 out of 8 conceptual categories. I'm going to talk about one by one later. And the first marked discrepancies identified in the both teacher and the student group was in the category of teacher as the instructor, because interestingly, the first year students have the similar conceptualizations of this in the teachers group. Based on the their follow-up interviews, they suggest the reason is most of the first year students suffered from a cramping teaching style when they were in high school. So they are so desperately to be the independent learner, which is quite fit with the learning style the teacher expected of student. But for the third year student, they suggest the reasons why they wanted higher level of support from the teachers, such as teacher as instructor. The first reason is most of the university students in China, as English major students, they have to attend the TEM4, that is the standard English exam, and they have to finish the exam in the first 2 years. And after that, very likely most of the students will face what we called it the gap period. They are so desperately to think carefully about how to do next. So at that moment, they perhaps need more support from the teachers and help them make the decision. The second reason is in the final 2 years of a university course, most students will have to take a set of English modules, which at higher advanced level, which at higher level and representing intellectual jump compared with the course when they took in the first 2 years. So that's why they hope to get more support from the teachers. And the second, the categories we identify the discrepancies between the two groups is in the category of teacher as a transmitter. Most students hope the teachers can play a significant role to give them more knowledge, more cultural knowledge. But the teachers, on the other hand, they didn't plan much time on introducing the cultural knowledge because of the tight prescribed the teaching schedules, which did not allow the much time to discuss the cultural issues. The third group is we identify the big difference between the teachers and the student group is teacher as authority, because teachers trying to develop an interpersonal relationship between the students. They hope they can get more or learn, or they could learn from what students contribute in the classroom. But students just trying to hold a long-standing tradition, and they respect the teachers or teachers as authority. They give the teacher much respect as they can. And the fourth group we identify the marked difference is teacher as the interest arouser and following the teacher as co-worker. The same reason like teacher as authority, the teacher hope still believe the student can contribute quite a lot in the classroom, or they treat it as the whole learning process as a teamwork and rather than as like a kind of a monologue. But on this point, the student didn't bear this in mind. So what they want to do is get knowledge from teachers straight away. So that's another difference we identify in this group. As we mentioned later, as we mentioned before, due to face-saving issues, not all students are happy to enter into the discussion, like face-to-face interaction with the teachers. They don't want to make the public comment on their teachers' teaching practice. So we have to limit it, the interaction, and only ask the teachers to comment on the student matter first. And we have some interesting results. The first thing is most of the teachers are really happy to reschedule their teaching practice, and such as when they heard the third-year students are expected much support, compared with the first-year student. The teachers, most teachers suggest that they have never ever bear these issues in mind, so they're going to trying to give the third-year student much more support than previously they did. And the second bit is most teachers do hold the belief that teachers should not be treated as authority, and teachers should not always doing a monologue in a classroom, and the learning process should be treated as a teamwork. It means they still hold the belief that the student can make the possible contributions to the entire teaching and learning process. And the third thing is, when after teachers heard students want more support from the cultural perspective, and all of the teachers expressed that they were trying to reschedule their teaching practice, try to make a room for the teaching culture, just in this very tight teaching schedules. So just because all the teaching practice, the timetable and the schedule has been prescribed, so they have to really think carefully on how to make a room and allow the time for teaching the culture knowledge to the student. That's it.
Okay, so the method does seem to work quite well, and the question then arises at the end of this: if you want to do a similar sort of study, how can you extend what we've been doing? There are different ways in which this could be done. One way to extend the study would be to bring in other participants. There have been one or two other studies, like Steve Bialystok's looking at reading courses, where parents were asked to conceptualise. We didn't do this, but you could actually bring in parents, you could bring in administrators, you could bring in a range of stakeholders, just as you would do in a normal evaluation.
In the study, also we have some teachers showing a willingness to change their teaching practice. Unfortunately, we have no chance to track how far the teacher actually make change in their teaching practice. So it would be rather very interesting for the future research could actually track and how teachers actually change their teaching behavior after they have been exposed to student perspectives. And the second limitation we can have is about the validity of the method that we use in the study. You may remember at the stage 1 we organized a small workshop and trying to make sure all the students understand what we wanted them to do with metaphors. Why we organize workshop? Because we over the last decade, quite a lot of studies have already recognized the task of failure in this type of metaphor completion task. In other words, the metaphor completion task is not equally easy for all the people. So a quick implication is that the future research should check the task, check with the participant if they have any problem with the task. If they have, the researchers has the responsibility to give students some support to completion the task. That's it.
The other way that the method could be extended would be to bring a little bit more interaction. Now, for reasons that one said, it wasn't possible to actually get the students and the teachers interacting together, but that actually would be really interesting to do. Now, the difficulty, of course, is that you can't just bring two groups together in this sort of context, because you've got massive face issues and sort of cultural assumptions being made. However, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be interesting to do. And what it means is that someone somewhere could usefully develop a method for actually working out how you could get face-to-face interaction to take place. And that would be a really, really interesting study. So the message is, go off and do it.